Hi, my name's Nick, and we're in the White Mountains chasing brook trout. Once summer gets here, this is really where I spend all my time, in the blue lining up in the White Mountains. Lots of opportunity, cold water, and plenty of fish. Usually I'm using a 2-weight rod, about 7.5 feet. I find anything bigger than that tends to outgun the fish and take away some of the fun. I keep it pretty simple, just a little neck thing here, loaded up with flies. For shoes, I tend to wear climbing approach shoes with sticky rubber. There's all sorts of special shoes out there, but if you're doing a lot of hiking and jumping on wet rocks, I find these work pretty well. I wear long pants all the time, even in the hotter part of the summer, because there's a lot of branches, poison ivy, nettles on the side of the river, and this just gives me a little bit of protection. And let me gear up and then we'll head into the water. So I'm using a really lightweight reel. There's no need for anything special here. All it does is hold the line. As I said, a 2-weight rod. I don't use anything heavier than that generally. And the line I'm using is a true 2-weight, but it's a creek style line, so it has a short front taper, so it loads the rod quickly. You don't need a long, delicate taper on the line because you're not going to have much line out there, so you need the rod to load immediately. The leader is nice and short, anywhere between 6 and 7 feet just generally works fine. Down to about 5-6x is good. For flies, I really keep it pretty simple for me. Brook trout fishing is all about the dry fly fishing. I have a few Lucky Charms in there, nymphs. They never actually get used, but they look good in the box. And really my standard go-to fly is the mini flopper from Fly Fish Food. What I like about it, it's easy to see. It lays flat in the water. There's no hackle underneath, which will prevent small trout being able to get onto the hook point. And its main floatant is foam. While I have floatant on my vest or on my lanyard, I really don't like using it, so it's much easier for me if the fly floats on its own, and then I can just keep casting and catching and not mending the fly the whole time. Alright, as you probably noticed, I'm not wearing a ball cap, and as you can see, the foliage here is pretty tight. And what I find in this type of terrain, if you wear a ball cap, you sort of put blinkers on and you can't see what's above and behind you, and you end up in the trees a lot more. Well, the water's definitely cold, so no worries about temperature. And the other big thing with brook trout fishing is no matter how enthusiastic you are, don't hike and cast at the same time. It never ends well. I tend to just like to get myself into position, get comfortable, and then start casting. If you rush it, you'll always end up tripping and going face down. Now, I've never fished this section of water before, so we'll just see how it is. It's a long pool, quite deep, probably a little deeper than I usually like for brook trout fishing. In the very deep pools, the fish have a lot of food opportunities deep down in the hole, and so sometimes they're not tempted to come to the surface. And you could do a dry dropper or put a little streamer through there, but for me, summer is all about dry flies, so I really try and stay on the dry flies. And I find that in the White Mountains at least, water that's 6 inches to 2 feet deep is perfect. It can still hold some good fish, but they're always surface orientated and are looking up, whereas the big sinkholes, they're often looking down and you may miss them. Check behind you that there's nothing above you, and then I generally start at the back of the pool. Keep the rod high. There's a lip back here, and often the fish will be right on that lip. short casts because at the back of the pool the water speeds up quickly as it comes over the lip, and if you make a long cast you just find that the line gets sucked down and the fly gets dragged and you don't get a good drift. So I rushed it pretty quickly there, but I didn't get the feeling that there was a lot going on there. And usually on a pool like this, you've got a main current coming down the center, which can definitely bring up the fish, but I tend to like to just start on the side, start in the middle of the pool, on the side of the current, work a little higher, but on the edge of the main current, not in the main current generally. Lengthen the line out. Then take a shot at the other side. And we have a little brookie. Now, as you can see by the size of this fish, if I was using any more than a 2-weight, I'd probably actually not know I had the fish on and I'd be flinging it into the trees behind me. So for me, sizing down to a tackle that's appropriate for the quarry is all important. You wouldn't use your striper rod to go chasing brown trout. I like to wet my hand, slide it under. I tend to hold the fish upside down, and that just automatically makes them go quiet, and then out he goes again. Now let's keep an eye on something, see if we can get something a little bigger now. Once I've played on the edges, I will come into the main current and just see if we can pull anything up there. Back to the edges though. At the top of the pool here, we've got a little honey hole in the center. So we'll drop the line in, keep the rod high so we can get a drag-free drift as long as we can. Let the fly come all the way down. Move my arm down so I'm just following the fly. And you see how long a drag-free drift I can get? It's probably 6 feet so far off one cast. So my rod hand's high, there's no line on the water, just tip it. I don't like to spend too much time on a particular pool. If you're not catching fish in the first few casts or getting rises, I just tend to like moving. For me, this is a combination of hiking and fishing. It's not all just about fishing, so I tend to move a lot when I'm brook trout fishing. So as I've got to go around a big obstacle here, no line out, just rod up and see if I can get around the edge here. And of course, the nice thing about wearing climbing approach shoes with a sticky rubber is that when you're navigating around the edges of the water here, you can get a little rock climbing in with your fishing and your hiking. Bit of a 5-5 on the edge here. Yeah, another beautiful pool here, a little shallower with some rocks in the back end here. So again, start at the tail of the pool and we go on, there we go. I'm just going to walk it to the edge here so I can get down to the water. I don't try and lift them out and, oh, he's off. And that's often the case with brook trout. You know, you'll get a whole bunch of hookups, but you'll land very few. But what I was about to say is, oh, we've got another one. what I was about to say, if I hook them, I tend to walk them to the edge and then release them over the water rather than lifting them out of the water. And so these tail outs are often really productive. But again, once I've had a few casts through, I move on. Maybe in front of that rock there is a good place to look. And then again, don't walk and cast. Results will not be favorable. I tend to like to be right in the river where it's feasible. The least coverage on vegetation is generally right down the center of the river. So if you're in the river, your casts back and forth are generally the ones that are less troubled by foliage and so forth. Now what I'm casting into at the moment is very gravelly, very clear, and I tend to find that's not particularly effective. You saw at the back end of the pool here, there was a lot of dark, heavy mossed rocks, and that for me in the whites is a sign of really good brook trout habitat. But the very clear, gravelly white background I find much less effective. Looking water at the top here, and there we have a fish. Again, another monster doing what brook trout do, getting off the hook before we land him. Lots of long line releases in brook trout fishing. If you look at the pool here, we've got a long flat rock at the section, so the water just comes rushing off that. So in this case, the head of the pool is really not going to be very productive, but that water is dropping off down into a deeper section where we've got a lot of big rocks underneath the water, which are providing coverage for the fish, throwing any food that comes down in that direction. So my guess, if there's any fish in here, all the fish will be stacked towards the tail of the pool. So I'm going to start high sticking with my dry fly, just hitting the very back end of it. Again, no line on the water because the water really speeds up, and any line on the water is just going to rip the fly unnaturally down the current. And you see how long I can get these drifts with just a 7.5-foot rod. And basically just the leader out of the tippet. I've got a pretty stiff butt section on this leader, and it tapers down pretty fast to the 5X, or the 5.5X I've got here. And so it flicks the fly out there just nicely. Again, high rod gives a long drift. Doesn't necessarily give a fish, as we can see here. And I'm reaching over the main current. And on this type of water, you can always reach over a current pretty easily, or just wade a little closer and reach. Lift high, so none of the tippet is in, or none of the leader is in the main current. And again, you have a long, drag-free time on the surface with your dry fly. So if you look inside my box here, I don't have a lot of variety in flies, but I certainly have a few of each because there's nothing worse than finding the good luck fly and then running out. So foam-bodied flies, which generally imitate terrestrials. Something like this is probably imitating caddis or a stonefly. Brook trout are opportunistic in the White Mountains. They have a very short growing spell. For me, it's usually August and July and August where I'm fishing the high mountains. Outside that, it starts to get too cold. Obviously, a Parachute Adams works really well because it works really well anywhere. This is the pink variation in honor of Barbie doing so well in the movies at the moment. As I said, I got a few nymphs. I never use them, but they look good. When I'm looking for bigger fish, something like the Grumpy Frumpy here from Cheech is a great pattern. Also in really boisterous water, heavily hackled, lots of foam, floats like a cork, works really well. These fish are pretty small though, so I'm going to downsize a little. And this is a pattern called the APT All-Purpose Terrestrial, designed by Paul Proctor from the UK. And it really is a pattern that just works anywhere. I'm using the high vis version here, but we also have a grey-white wing version. I just find in this turbulent water and also with aging eyesight, something bright is really key. It's got a big hook gap, no hackle underneath, so even when you're chasing small fish, it's going to be a quick hookup and not a lot of refusals. So let me just change that out. Snip off the mini flopper. So this is what I like to see in a brook trout pool or run. Lots of mossy dark rocks. Not particularly deep, certainly deep enough to give plenty of cover, but not too deep so the fish are focused all on the bottom. So let's see what happens here and see if the fish agree with my analysis. So we'll start at the back end, a little roll and a little high stick in, and there we got a fish. I guess the fish do like those mossy rocks. So we talked about the best avenue of casting is up and down the river because that's where the least foliage is. But I want to cast directly across here and just look in that little pocket over there. Lots of foliage behind me, branches, a little bit across the stream. So all I do is use a little bow and arrow cast. And I can put it exactly on the far side, no back cast, lift the rod, nice long drift all the way down, past all the fish that are not there, that would normally come bouncing up and take it, but today are not there. So, as I said at the beginning, I've never fished this piece of water before. I'm just trying it out, and as we've seen, it's a beautiful piece of water, not particularly productive, or not very productive at all. Just a couple of small fish in here. But the joys of blue lining in the White Mountains is you just move from one blue line to the next and you check them out, and then you find these little honey hole streams that are so productive, it blows your mind. And what I tend to do with those, I find them, love them the day that I fish them, and I may not fish them again for another year because they're so special and they produce so many good fish that I'll just keep exploring for another stream, hoping for something similar. And then when next year comes around, I've got that memory of that really special place, and I go back and have that amazing day again, because usually it's just as amazing the next year. And that fuels me, and then I can go looking for other stuff which can be just as productive, or like on this little piece of water, beautiful but not particularly productive. Oh, there we go, we got one. Now you see on a 2-weight here how much fun this is. If you had a 5-weight here, it would not be a lot of fun at all. Bring him in, slide him across the surface.
Yeah, you can do whatever with this now.
So again, barbless hooks just means that you just slide it out, take one last look, say goodbye, and he's off.